What's going on? Welcome into the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral, right here on San Antonio Spurs on SI. I am Joe Gaither. You are watching us on the San Antonio Spurs on SI YouTube channel, or right here on my own social media machines at Joe Gaither6. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube to watch the show. Send us a comment, a question, a query about the show, about the Spurs, about the NBA, right there to our social media machines at Joe Gaither6. Or download us, rate us, review us, listen to us weekly. Spurs on SI, the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon. We're going to have a lot of fun, and we bring in our expert. As always, Matt Guzman joins us, and you can follow him at MattGZman on the Twitter machine, or follow all of his work on San Antonio Spurs on SI at SAS on SI on the Twitter machine. Matt, we appreciate your time. Welcome back in for another week. How has your week been going? One more week closer in the NBA offseason.
That's right. It's been fun. It's been a pretty relaxing week. Not too much going on, just kind of keeping up with the offseason and obviously the Olympics. It's been kind of the driving factor of NBA coverage. So it's been cool to keep up with, but I appreciate your time as always. It's always good to do this.
Absolutely. It is always good to do this. And we're talking about the San Antonio Spurs or through a Spurs lens. So let's jump in and talk about the Olympic Games so far, with Victor Wembanyama, our superstar, taking the Spurs to a 2-0 record and beating Team Japan yesterday, 94-90 in overtime. Victor Wembanyama really saying, okay, once we're in overtime, I'm going to raise my game. 8 points in overtime to slam the door on Japan. What do you make of Victor so far? They've got one more game in the group. They're playing Germany coming up. What do you make about Victor and his contribution to Team France to take them to 2-0 so far at the Paris Olympics?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming into this Olympic season, the big question was going to be, A, how does Victor fit alongside some other stars like Rudy Gobert? And B, just how much will the show kind of revolve around him? Because obviously, with the Spurs, everything's kind of about him. The offense, the defense is run through him. But obviously at the Olympic stage, things look a little bit different. Not only is the game played at a different speed, a little bit of a different rate, but, these players, some of them have been there for a long time. You got Nicholas Batum on the squad that's been in the NBA for years and years. Gobert's the oldest Defensive Player of the Year winner. He's got years behind him. And then you've got guys like Victor and younger guys too, like Bilal Coulibaly, his former teammate who's joining him on that team. And so there was a few questions about his performance and just what it would look like. And definitely through 2 games, he's shown that, he's still that same star. And it's actually been really cool to watch, because this is the first time that he's being paired with a star like Rudy Gobert or somebody like Batum, these NBA vets. And obviously upcoming with Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, he'll get to play with some of his own vets now. But it's been very promising. He's shown that he can work alongside another big center like Rudy, another guard like Bilal. He can kind of adapt his game where needed, and he's shown out. So it's been good to watch.
All right, so take that theme or that concept into what we will see. You teased it just a little bit with Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, excuse me. You teased it just a little bit in your last answer, but you add Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes to this San Antonio Spurs roster, and it does look like it's basically finalized at this point. Not yet set in stone, but pretty close to it. The cement is setting on the roster. So you add these 2 veterans, and we've gone over Stephon Castle a time or two, but you add a talent like Stephon Castle, who appears to play with a high IQ and high motor, so a perfect Greg Popovich type player. So you add these 3 players really to the formula that is Victor Wembanyama, the alien-like formula, a formula we've never really seen before in the NBA. What can the second year of the Victor Wembanyama project really look like for San Antonio, if you see just a little glimpse of what he plays like or how he's able to get a team to really into winning ways because of his ability? When you just add just a little bit of talent around him with Team France, what can that really mean for San Antonio's second year with Victor Wembanyama?
Absolutely. And at the end of the season, he really kind of found his consistency. And that was kind of something that he'd been struggling with at the beginning of the year. He was really, really talented, but, he would have nights where he'd shoot, below 50%, and he wouldn't, get many more than 12 points or so. And then he'd have nights where he could score 40, or 38 points and beat the Phoenix Suns, so he was kind of off and on at the beginning of the year, but the talent was clearly there. So as the season progressed, you kind of saw that talent shift into more of a controlled, like a controlled effort, because he could hit the floor and give you consistently, 10 rebounds, 20 points. He could hit the floor and give you 3 blocks and 2 steals. It became a little bit more predictable what kind of stat line he would have. And so now that he's gotten a chance to play with some veterans on a world stage, he's able to kind of take that consistency and say, okay, so here's what it looks like when I'm consistent. And now we're getting to see what it looks like when he's consistent with other veterans who know how to play the game and who have been around the game for quite a while. Obviously, a lot of his teammates are really young. So that's going to be the biggest benefit of having somebody like Harrison Barnes and having someone like Chris Paul, because not only are they learning off the ball off the court from these players, but when they're on the court, Victor can say, okay, this is what I bring to the table. I know what you bring to the table because you've done it for years. So let's show them what that looks like together. And so obviously the icing on the cake is going to have these young players like Jeremy Sohan and Stephon Castle and Julian Champagnie kind of continue to develop. And the idea is that when you have these veterans added to the mix, everybody just starts to gel a little bit more than they did at the beginning of last season. Because, not only are they better, A, but B, they've added these veterans that can help, just push that forward and allow Victor to kind of do his thing, but also just, like I said earlier, just kind of make it more of a controlled effort and less of a, we're going to throw everybody out there, just kind of show what you can do and see, hope it works. That was a lot of the issues last year, was just figuring out who goes where. And so hopefully that's a little bit clearer as we enter this upcoming season.
All right, so Team France goes into a matchup against Germany where they will be favored, and they're going to look to go 3-0 on a home soil. We talked a little bit about Team France last week, but now sitting 2-0 in the group stage, Matt, can the Blue knock off Team USA down the line if these two teams get paired up?
I think that they could put up a fight. I'm not so sure that they'd be able to pull an upset. They definitely have the talent to do something like that. And they, Team USA has shown that if you kind of play them the right way, they are not invincible. And so I could see a close game happening. But at the end of the day, it's like what you see with these young teams in the playoffs. It tends to be the older, more experienced team that ends up being able to pull through when it matters the most in that game 6 or that game 7. And so, the only time that France is going to meet USA is going to be if they make it far enough in the knockout stage. And by that point, you got LeBron James, who knows everything about everything that has to do with clutch games and playoff and, win when it matters. It's going to be tough for them to kind of overcome that. Not only the momentum that USA would have built to get to that point, but also just the sheer experience that they have and players who know how to turn it on. And Victor showed us in overtime, that he has that gene and he's going to be able to be that clutch player down the road, but he's still very young. And so it's going to be a tough task for him to come over and beat USA. But at the same time, he's got a chance for sure to kind of give him a run for their money.
We're hanging out with Matt Guzman from San Antonio Spurs on SI right here on the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral. And recently we alluded to the Spurs roster being kind of not quite in stone, but the cement is almost drying on the San Antonio roster. They formalized their 3 two-way contracts. You wrote about them, David Duke, Harrison Ingram, and tell us about the third two-way contract. And let's talk about all 3 guys and why they were designated with this two-way contract distinction.
Absolutely. Now, from past years, just the fact that they have 3 two-way spots is a little bit newer. It used to be just 2. So at the end of last season, Jamari Bouye is that third name. He signed a contract for 2 years for a two-way deal with the Spurs. Kind of finished out the season with them. They liked what they saw, and they took him into Summer League, and he showed out. He was the guy that came up with 2 clutch 3-pointers to help them win a game, in Vegas. And he was the player that can kind of run the floor. He's small, but he's very elusive. He knows how to use his body and kind of get his way, create his own shots. And so he was a player the Spurs very much liked. They're going to bring him back this upcoming season. So he had the first spot locked down. After that, David Duke Jr. came back, and he was the one who also was with the Spurs at the end of last season on that two-way deal. He didn't sign a guaranteed 2-year deal, so he kind of had to earn his spot again, but they liked what he saw, or they liked what they saw from him at Vegas as well. So here in that second spot, And then Harrison Ingram, obviously the rookie, was the guy who ended up yesterday signing that two-way deal and officially inking his spot with both the Austin Spurs and the San Antonio Spurs. From what I've heard, Spurs really like what he can bring to the table as far as shooting goes. He's a player that will actually benefit, ironically, from Harrison Barnes. So you got the Harrison duo, because Harrison Barnes is kind of that shooter, and he's been around. So, Harrison Ingram is somebody who can come in and hit knockdown shots. He's got some size to him. So those are the three players that are ultimately going to be kind of splitting time with Austin and San Antonio. But it all came from that standpoint that they just like what they saw from them. They see the potential and they want them to get a chance to develop in Austin, but also, bring what they have to this young team that still has a ways to go.
How difficult is it going to be on nights where you have both Harrison Barnes and Harrison Ingram on the roster? Now, obviously, it's not going to be all 82 games, but you'll be dealing with that for 15 or so games. You're going to have to be watching out with your spelling or your designation as you're taking your notes. Are you ready for the Harrison combination, Matt?
I'm just glad that it's not Oklahoma City with Jalen Williams and Jalen Williams and Jalen Williams and Kenrick Williams. But I think I'm ready for the two Harrisons. Hopefully I don't get them confused. They got pretty different numbers. So.
Well, okay, before we got going, we were talking, just bantering a little bit about the ceiling for these Spurs. And it's not probably going to be NBA champions, but really when you look at what they have added and what Victor Wembanyama has done already through 2 games in the Olympics and what he did in his rookie year, there's no reason to think that the Spurs can't be fighting for one of these play-in team spots. Maybe not going to go into the NBA, into the Western Conference Finals, but can get a play-in spot and win a game or two, win a round or two, and I think play in a real series. It might be their ceiling this year.
Absolutely. Last year, the big issue at the beginning of the season, at least, was kind of like what I mentioned earlier. Victor just didn't really have that rhythm down. He was still kind of dealing with, how do I go on the floor and get my rebounds and get my points, but also help my teammates. And, sometimes there would be games where he would be the star of the show, but he would be the only one that was really contributing, especially that game really early on against the Suns where he just did everything on Halloween night to kind of, get that, come back from behind and get a win. And so this upcoming season, what we're going to see is the end version of Victor Wembanyama at the end of the season, who was consistently getting 20 points and 10 rebounds and 4 blocks and 3 steals. We're going to see that version of Victor right from day one. And not only that version, but also a version who's now who's just finished playing Olympic basketball to get more reps. Exactly. Who's just finished training camp with Chris Paul, who's gotten a chance to work with him. And he's going to enter the season already a little bit more refined, a little sharper, but also with that natural progression that he had just towards the end of the year. He's not going to have to find his groove again the way that he did last year. And so there was even a couple of games, quite a few actually, last season where the Spurs were barely in it, or they were in it, they barely lost. If you turn a couple of those games from losses to wins, that team was nearly a 30-win team. And so it's not far-fetched in the slightest to say that they could add 10 wins onto that this season and get to 40. You get to 40 that last season, that's just outside of the play-in. But, if they're making that push toward the play-in and they know, hey, these games are on the line, it might be a little bit easier to say, well, hey, we got 10 games to get 3 wins because, that's what's going to get us into that 10th spot to at least try to make the play-in and try to make the playoffs. It could look a little bit different. It's hard to say right now, but they're definitely in a position to be a lot better than they were last season. Like you said, probably not NBA champions, but you can't sleep on a play-in berth, especially with a team this young.
Well, it's going to be a lot of fun to follow the San Antonio Spurs, and you guys can follow the Spurs and all the action in the NBA on San Antonio Spurs on SI. Follow them on Twitter at SAS on SI and Matt Guzman at MattGZMan. Matt, you want to talk about Christmas? I think there was a conversation to be had about the San Antonio Spurs playing on Christmas last year, Victor Wembanyama's rookie year, and maybe what the schedule might look like as it comes out, if the Spurs will be featured on Christmas Day or not. What do you make of the second year of Victor Wembanyama getting onto that Christmas Day lineup?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where you just kind of have to sit and think, have the Spurs earned it? And if not, do they still provide a spectacle big enough for the league to put them on arguably one of their most watched days of the season? NFL I think is going to start having some games, or they did last year too, some games on Christmas, but up until that point the NBA had kind of ruled that day. That was NBA on Christmas is what you watched. And so, it's definitely one of those things where the NBA wants to have the teams that are going to attract an audience and the ones that, deserve to be featured on a big stage like that, much bigger than the stage that they had probably 2 games before on a random Tuesday night. And so historically, teams that have done well, like the Celtics, like the Lakers, like the Nuggets, and last year the 1 seed, the Thunder, are probably going to be on Christmas this upcoming season. Those are the kind of teams that get those spots because they have the history, they have they've been performing well, they have stars on their team, and so the Spurs only fit 2 of those criteria. And now that they have a star and they provide a spectacle, they will draw an audience with Wembanyama. And so the last kind of I guess the last piece of that up in the air is just whether or not the NBA is going to prioritize that, or the fact that they haven't done anything quite yet to earn a spot on Christmas like some of the other teams. So I'm curious to see your thoughts, if you think that they should be playing on Christmas, or if the NBA should kind of honor that, you have to earn it, or what you're thinking.
Well, believe that I have. Yeah, this is NBA on Christmas Day 2023. This is last year. And it looks like Christmas was on a Monday last year. And you have Bucks and Knicks lead you off. You got Warriors and Nuggets are next. Celtics and Lakers are your third slot. 76ers and Heat are your first nighttime game. And then it ends with Mavericks and Suns. And so this year looks like Christmas is on a Wednesday. And I ask you, Matt, which one of those teams that we just laid out, that's what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 teams, which one of these teams are you bumping off for the San Antonio Spurs? And really, you think about teams like you might bump off the Suns, depending on what you think of them this year. You might be bumping off the Bucks if you think that they're not going to be bouncing back. You might be bumping off the Lakers if you think that they're going to be a play, but you're not bumping off the Lakers because it's the Lakers and it's LeBron James, and you're not bumping. You're probably not going to be bumping off the Suns because of Durant still. Oh, goodness gracious. Who would you bump off? You might be bumping off the 76ers. But really, I think if you're the NBA, you're probably betting that the Spurs are still a year away from being one of these. They might miss out on them because they might instead favor the Pelicans, who might take a gamble on the Pelicans over one of these 10 teams. But really, I don't think the Spurs present enough to take a gamble on quite yet. Obviously, Wembanyama, Rookie of the Year last year, and you're expecting to take a huge step forward. But what's a worst case scenario? Harrison Barnes turns out to have a bad shooting year, and Chris Paul has lost his explosion, and Stephon Castle is still too young to translate to the NBA, and it's still another year of Victor by himself and some misfit toys. Like, if that ends up happening and you're still around the 30-win mark, well, no, you're not going to put that team on Christmas Day. But if they all band together and everything clicks and it's green lights on all fronts, and they hit 44, 45 wins, then heck yeah, you want to put them on Christmas because they're an up-and-coming team. And what do you say? You bump off the Warriors because they just lost Klay Thompson and they're in the twilight. Maybe that's a team you take a risk on. Sure. on losing because everything they've got is now seemingly behind them. So there's room to move up to this Christmas Day lineup, and it's probably not going to be this exact same 10-team lineup, even if you up the opponents. It's probably you're still going to be mixing and matching probably 3 or 4 of these teams. You're still going to keep the Lakers on your list. You're still going to keep the Knicks on your list because of how strong of a year they came on with. You're probably still keeping the Nuggets and the Celtics. So there's 4. You're probably keeping the Mavericks because they made the finals as 5. And so you're probably looking for 5 new teams to match up with those 5 teams. I think that you're going to pass on the Celtics this season, or excuse me, on the Spurs this season. But they're close. I think they're right on the edge of that decision. Matt. What do you think about it?
Absolutely, and I think you're right. Because if you were to take those 5 teams and say these are surefire, we're going to put these guys on Christmas, you still have the Timberwolves who just beat the Nuggets.
Yep.
You still have the Thunder who came off of the number 1 seed, or like you said, the Pelicans. So that it's a tough question to ask because
I think the Thunder are definitely on it. Definitely.
Right. And because that's a tough team to bump, even though they got swept in the first round, they still have Kevin Durant. Same with the Bucks, even though, Giannis was hurt for that first series, which is why, likely the reason I should say why they didn't end up beating the Pacers, when they met. So you can't really bump them because Giannis is coming back. He's going to be just as exciting as ever. Like, it's tough because, like you said, the Spurs do have that spectacle in Victor, and absolutely he's a player that everyone wants to watch. But you'd have a hard time making a case for the Spurs, who have yet to make the playoffs, who have yet to really do anything palpable with Victor yet. They just have this bright future and this incredibly high ceiling, and they're certainly going to reach it if things continue to trend the way that they have. But that's just not quite yet. And so I think I agree with you. I don't really see them getting a chance on Christmas again this year, but there is certainly a question to be asked, especially after last year's matchup with LeBron, when the Spurs ended up winning, or, the new rivalry between Chet and Victor that the NBA is pushing on that Rivals Week. There's a couple of games where, you could see that being a good matchup to put on Christmas, but at the end of the day, I think you have a tough time bumping one of those squads.
We got to find a way for the Spurs to be in position to draft Cooper Flag. So you pair Stephon Castle, Cooper Flag, and Victor Wembanyama, and you terrorize the NBA for the next decade with that trio.
Absolutely.
I think you put the Spurs on Christmas Day, and I'm kind of joking about the Cooper Flag. You don't want to be in that position as a Spurs fan, but you get one more star and you let Stephon Castle cook for a year or 2 or 3, you might really have something. Because I think that's the kind of kid that can blossom into a real player. But you need one more. Like you know how it works in the NBA. I mean, Victor is a one of a kind player, but it takes more than really 1 or 2 players. You need that third player to mix things up, to make it really challenging to put you in that championship picture, in that, we're in the top 5 or 6 teams in the league, not in the top 12 teams in the league. And obviously top 12 in the whole league is a great position to be in. But that third star, if they can find a way to get, and Chris Paul's not it, and Harrison Barnes in it, they're good players, but they're not that star level.
Right.
If they can find a way to find a third star somewhere in the next year or 2, the Spurs might be really cooking with something.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And that's kind of been the big question with Larry Markin in this offseason is, is he that star? And I'm inclined to say no. If so, the Spurs probably would have put some more things on the table if they really believed in the fit and the, what could be with that kind of a pairing. But I think that they still got, they still have another year. Like there's no rush on this quest to what they hope is a dynasty, what they hope is a multi-year period where they're constantly in that conversation. That does not have to happen this season.
Yeah, because Castle's got to cook a little bit. He's got to marinate a little bit. He's got to sit in his cocoon a little bit. And so is Lauri Markkanen that player that can put you into the championship picture this year? No. And so you don't pass up on that dude because of that. Okay, does that mean that 7 more wins? He might be good for 6 or 7 wins on the schedule. Sure. And come on, yes, that's fun, but does that win you an NBA championship? No. And so what would you give up for those probably 6 or 7 wins on the schedule?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know how much you really want to give up for that.
No, absolutely. And that's, they're preaching this patient approach, this, this game of kind of slow and steady, and it's, I just wrote a piece on it. To me, that's the right move for the Spurs because, there's not a player right now that, is available that's feasible for them to go after, who's, going to take them to basically who's going to jumpstart their development to a point where it's like a no-brainer. There's still players that have to develop further. And so, sure, like you said, you add a player and they get better, but in the long run, that's not ultimately who's going to get you to the championship because that player has yet to be seen. That player is not available right now. Maybe next summer they'll be available. We even talked about a couple seasons ago, Giannis Antetokounmpo was, thinking about leaving Milwaukee, and what would he look like? And you never know what can happen. For all we know, Steph Curry could decide that he wants to take his talents to San Antonio instead of signing that $63 million extension with the Warriors for a year. It's very hard to tell and gauge right now. I think that where they're at right now, they just rounded out their roster. They're good. They know that they have pieces. They're going to be better. They brought in some veteran experience to kind of make sure that they're going to be better this upcoming season, but they're in no rush to get to the NBA finals because they know that they have a player very willing and very capable of taking them there, but they kind of want to take their time and make sure they're doing it, the right way, as opposed to kind of acting on impulse. And next thing you know, you have no future. And the player that you traded all your picks for is not working out.
They got to stack all these assets in for Cooper Flag next year.
That's what they need. That'd be something else, and he's a player that, absolutely him and Victor would be a spectacle to watch. So, it's just so fluid. It's hard to kind of put a nail on it right now, but I think that they definitely have a vision, and that should be something to look forward to.
Well, Matt, it's been a lot of fun hanging out with you, and we will catch up with you next week. We'll see. Will Team France will they beat Germany and still be alive this time next week?
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to watching it. I believe is that tomorrow afternoon, I believe.
I think that France is on the 2nd. So that's on Friday, right? Friday. Team USA got started 10 minutes ago against South Sudan. So as we sign off, it's 10-10 in the first quarter.
I guess we'll see how long that holds.
LeBron James has 8 points. Anthony Davis has 2 points.
So it's the Lakers versus South Sudan right now.
Yeah, exactly. We'll catch up with you next week right here on the Joe Gaither Show on Spurs Central. Make sure you follow my friend Matt Guzman at MattGZMan on the Twitter machine. Matt, thanks so much for your time and have a great week.
Perfect. You too. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's Matt Guzman hanging out with us, and you've been hanging out with us on the San Antonio Spurs on SI YouTube machine. We appreciate you following us on that page as well, and you can find us on your favorite Spotify, on your favorites podcast machine, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon. We'll be back next week for another edition of the Joe Gaither Show on Spurs Central on the San Antonio Spurs on SI.